do see in the intro where Alsar is holding the blade and pointing at the worker, and the worker's locked up,
being sealed in there. Yeah.
right? Being sealed in. And obviously, at that point, the assumption then, based on what you're saying, is that he still had his memory at that point. So,
Yes.
what unfolded plan-wise such that his memory would be wiped, and is Tell somehow
Right.
involved in this, or?
Yeah. So, oh, go ahead.
So so part of the plan was, so the Infinity Blade needed to be tuned, like Donald said, and they knew, or the workers' secrets knew, that the way to tune it was to actually to kill a Deathless, and by doing that, that would tune the sword. And they had to do it over and over and over and over again. So part of the plan was that Osar would be, he would do this, he would die over and over and over and over and over again. And but like Donald said, what he didn't realize was that the worker had, so even though Osar betrayed him first, locked him away in the Vault of Tears,
He'd already gone through the process of whatever. Again, I don't want to get too specific, but whatever process where they're like, okay, let's start aligning the Infinity Blade so that the next time you're killed, it will start this process of attunement.
Yes.
That's where the worker slipped in whatever genetic coding that would say the next time you die, your memory is going to be gone also.
Yeah,
And
because
so Alsar had already had that process.
the way that we shouldn't get too much into it, but the way the Infinity Blade works is that it actually messes with someone's QIP signature and allows them to be killed for real. And I mean, we can get more into specifics of how Deathless work, but through that same process, you can also tweak someone's QIP, tweak their DNA a little bit, and change them. And this is what the worker secretly did as a part of their mutual betrayal, is that he changed it such that the next time he was killed by a specific weapon, that he would be changed, and that's what caused him to not only lose his memory, but to come back as a child instead of as a full-grown person like they normally do. And so that's where the whole Infinity Blade 1 loop comes from, where he not only, whenever he dies, he comes back as a child and has to go through his whole childhood again. That's why it's basically every 18 or 20 years when someone comes back, because he actually had a chance to grow up again and go back.
Yep.
Okay. So we've seen Alsar, and we've seen how he relates to the worker, and that the worker communicates with him about creating and destroying the world, on a similar basis as what he's been doing. So I'm assuming that Alsar came after the worker in terms of when they were originated. Is that correct?
That is probably too spoilery. Alsar is also very old.
So the origin of Alsar in relation to the worker is probably
that's
locked down for now.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah. You can safely say that Alsar came after the Worker's Secrets.
Right.
Whether that's 5 minutes or 5,000 years,
Yeah.
we won't say.
Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah. Alsar is very old.
Yeah, he's very old.
And even so, I've seen let's just get specific. Like, I've seen some speculation that like Uriel is actually Alsar, or like Adram was Alsar.
No. So Uriel has no direct connection to you. So he just died.
Uriel went off and and lived his life, and I imagine Uriel went back home and the police showed up and found his murdered wife and a dead body laying in his driveway and a disappeared son that can't be accounted
But his
for.
story is untold. Uriel is Ray Jarrah's father.
Yep.
And that's it.
Yep.
Okay, interesting.
He played his part.
So in terms of a lot of people want to know about the device in the worker's hand at the beginning of Infinity Blade 2. What is that? And, how does it play a role in the story?
Okay, so the Infinity Blade. So the Infinity Blade is made up of several components. The most important part of the Infinity Blade is the QIP destabilization ring that is basically the base of the Infinity Blade sword. That's what causes all the destabilization and the scrambling of the QIP that Jeremy was talking about. What the difference is once that technology that destabilization is the critical component. But it only destabilizes the QIP for a fraction of a moment. And so it's kind of the fusion of that with the blade that actually allows a Deathless to be killed, because in the very moment that their QIP becomes fully, disassociated, they are dead. They're stabbed through by a blade, and they're able to die. And that wouldn't work with like a bullet or an explosion or something, because it's too kinetic, too fast, right? And so it was the combination of that, and that's the technology, is that QIP destabilization ring, that is the real technology behind the Infinity Blade. When the worker created this technology, again, something went wrong. It didn't work right, and so the whole process had to start of attuning the QIP to it. But the worker isn't. He's very, very, very intelligent,
and he's not very trusting. And in making that ring, he didn't just make one of them. He made several that were linked together, so that when that one became fully charged or fully activated, the other QIP rings that he created would also become activated. And that. So basically, like the tuning process is more like, we could think of it like machine learning nowadays, where there's almost some sort of artificial intelligence that is learning and learning and learning, and eventually it becomes solid. It works, and once it works, it can be copied. Yep. So he created a system where as soon as one worked, they would all work.
Yep.
Hence all the blades in Infinity Blade 3.
Hence the blades.
Charged.
And so the reason why we showed that at the very, very start of Infinity Blade 2 was to show that moment where he's sitting there in his prison cell forever, and all of a sudden his little loop begins to glow. That's when he knew that the Infinity Blade was actually, because that activated and they all activated. So he had a little one, and others, and so that's when he kind of knew, oh man, change is coming, right? It actually worked, and that's why when he uses it on Thane, so like putting it up to Thane, touching Thane with it was enough to scramble his QIP, but not kill him, right? Because there was no, it's not actually an Infinity Blade yet, or part of Infinity technology, and that's where we see the monstrous repercussions of that. That's why like his QIP becomes scrambled, and immediately his DNA starts freaking out, and he starts to like collapse in on himself, and he's not actually dead. Thane is like, I feel so bad. I love Thane, and he like gets it worse than anyone else in the whole universe, because the other Deathless, they at least just die. Like he's like I imagine what happened to Thane. Like Thane probably, we don't show it, but imagine Thane like it's all totally destabilized, like his bones are all cracking. He's probably like laying on the floor in this like mangled pile of body, still barely probably conscious and like going crazy, as the worker is like, hey, go fight Radiar and let me free. And we probably don't show. Probably the next scene though is like, oh, and before you go, can you drag this guy out with you? So essentially like probably takes him back up, chucks him off the side of the Vault of Tears. Thinks he's dead.
If he was that kind.
If he's even that kind, like so Thane's probably like laying at the base of the Vault of Tears for like 20 years, just mangled, as his body's kind of healing but continuing to mutate and go insane. And
that's why it's faster for like in Infinity Blade 3, Cyrus will kill himself at the end of a quest to just warp back, because he has another body of himself waiting for him, and that process is linked up in such a way that the Deathless can instantaneously form up in a new body if it's already formed. But if they're left in their current body without actually fully dying, then it just takes them a long time to heal themselves. Yep. And that can take a long, long time if you're mangled that badly, especially when your DNA is a little bit scrambled.
Completely scrambled.
He'll fully heal, but it'll take a long time. So yes, he's not in a fun position.
Anyway, so that was our nod to, again, if you're really paying attention, that moment was when the Infinity Blade came activated, and that was also to allude to, because we knew in the third game we were going to introduce more Infinity Blades, and we want all that consistency, and we wanted to show that it's a progression. So that's what that was.
So that little thing drifting up when people teleport, so that's actually them dying, and then they rebirth somewhere else.
We didn't want to say it explicitly because it's kind of gross, but the whole idea is that so that's why they have to walk. They have to travel to the place they're going, because One of the rules we made for Infinity Blade, at least in our minds, is there is teleportation of, well, it's in the, we put it in the book, right? You can teleport inorganic matter, like swords and things like that, but there is no technology to transport organic matter. Like, that doesn't exist. They can never get it to work. It's, at least in our imaginations, beyond the capacity of science. So, if Cyrus needs to go to Larioth, he has to travel there physically. But once he's there, he's got to, again, if you really look in the resurrection chamber, in the hideout, if you look down below the bridges, there's all these kind of frosted out glass windows. And if you look really, really closely, there's rows and rows of bodies going back in each one. And those are all the buds of Cyrus and Issa, and that they have ready, that anytime they die, there's a fully formed bud ready to instantly come back. And so they're like, yeah, sure, it took me 2 months or whatever to get to Larioth, but once I'm there, again, what would you do if you were deathless? You would have some little device on you that you could hit, and it would just instantly incinerate your body, and you just wake back up, and that's how you would teleport.
And that's why they don't love it. It hurts.
Yeah.
It's not a pleasant process, and so if they had the choice, they would choose to travel rather than do that. However, because they're in a hurry in Infinity Blade 3 to, catch up with the Worker of Secrets, they use the more painful approach of warping back to their bodies.
And we kind of also wanted to show, just again, the progression of Cyrus as he becomes more of a deathless. Where in the first game it was, between each time you die, it's 20 years. And then, which is basically because he's still stuck in the loop, right? Where he's being born as a child, growing up, sometimes going back to fight the God King, sometimes not, whatever. But at least what you played was him going to fight the God King. And then in Infinity Blade 2, it was him dying at the Vault of Tears, and then Tell having to take a chunk of his body, because he didn't have his own resurrection chamber yet. The only thing he had was the resurrection chamber near where Sadie is, right? So again, I imagine, Cyrus dies, Tell goes up, lops off a finger or something, takes 2 months to walk back to where Sadie was. Cyrus regrows from that finger in an accelerated chamber over
and that's
a couple
what
weeks.
the resurrection chambers are. An accelerated healing chamber is essentially what they are. So if there's even a piece of them in there, then it'll regrow them much more quickly. So if Thane's broken body, he might take 20 years to fully heal.
Well,
whatever
200.
it is.
No,
Thane.
With no destabilization.
With no destabilization.
Right.
Versus if you're just so if, for example, all that was left of Cyrus was a finger, he would regrow. But it would take him many, many years.
Yep.
If that finger's put in a resurrection chamber, it'll take
a few weeks.
A few weeks.
Yep.
And if he has a fully grown body already, he can just basically jump into that.
So that's why in Infinity Blade 2 it was months, so 6 to 9 months, because he has to be taken back, has to regrow, and then he has to get on a boat and go back to Saranthia, right? So it's months. Whereas in Infinity Blade 3, he now has a fully functioning resurrection chamber with buds.
Yeah.
Right? So it's fast. And so again, then the symbology of his progression back into being one of the deathless, right? So